This is the Northwest Tank Line Super Bowl show coming to you from Radio Row, Mandalay Bay Hotel Convention Center in Las Vegas. It's the Moach, Bob Marjanovic. We're here for our 23rd year, and a guy who eclipses that rather easily is our next guest. He is Greg Cossell from NFL Films. If you want to break it down X's and O's, which we're going to do with Greg because he's the best in the business, he's the man. How many is this for you now?
Super Bowls?
Yeah.
I would say probably in the 30 range, give or take.
You stopped counting?
Yeah, yeah, but it's in the ballpark. I stopped counting with a lot of things. You know, when you start getting older, you stop counting with a lot of things.
I hear you. I'm getting to a birthday this year with a zero behind it, and I want to stop counting as well, especially when you hit those zeros. Of course, a lot of our fans in Vancouver can hear you on Ross Tucker's podcast. Of course, Ross is a good friend of ours, and as well you're with our good buddy Ian Furness down in KJR on a weekly basis as well. But, you know, it's interesting. I was listening to you and Ross talk about Brock Purdy. There's been so much discussion about Brock Purdy, and I thought you made this great point. Part of his game, and I'll let you elaborate on it, is that you couldn't evaluate it at the college level, but it's something that's a necessity at the NFL level, and that's just anticipation a lot of times.
Yeah, I think there's two things that really stood out to me about Purdy. You know, and it really, in many ways, it gets into a larger discussion of quarterback traits as well and how you evaluate quarterbacks. But two things about Purdy stood out once I started watching him in the NFL, which, of course, goes back to 2022, but saw it a ton this year, is he can throw with such great anticipation. And what that means is he turns it loose before receivers even really begin their breaks. So he's throwing to spots based on his understanding of coverage and the receiver's routes. And I've worked with a lot of quarterbacks over the years, you know, that have worked with me on the matchup show, guys who played quarterback in college. And, you know, obviously I defer to them a lot because I didn't play quarterback. But they say that is so hard to do because you're essentially throwing it to a spot. And when you throw it to a spot, it's really hard to put it right on a guy's hands because you're not throwing to him. You know, it's one thing, hey, if I'm sitting across from you and I'm going to throw it right to you, you know, I can see your hands, you're there. But if I'm throwing it to over there and I'm expecting you, you know, based on the route that I'm expecting you to be there, you know, 10 feet away, you know, that's a hard thing to do. And he's really been good at that. The other thing, and by the way, the point you made is correct. You don't see that a ton in college because the college game is totally different. The field's bigger, the hash marks are wider, there's more space. You don't necessarily have to make those kinds of anticipation throws in college. The other thing that he's shown to be innately really good at, which you also don't see in college, is his reaction to what we call late coverage rotation, where you get a picture pre-snap of the defense, and as soon as the ball snapped, the defense changes that picture. And you don't see that much in college at all. There are certain coaches that do. Maybe there's a select group that does, you know, the Nick Sabans, the Kirby Smarts. You know, there's certain guys that do some of that. But in the Big 12, you certainly didn't see very much of that. And he has had just such an innate feel for being able to recognize and react to late coverage rotation, which is a very hard thing to do for a young player.
Greg Cossell from NFL Films is our guest, of course, an X's and O's expert, watches probably more film than some coaches. Brian Baldinger, a good friend at the NFL Network, said that Brock Purdy needs to make 5 money throws in this game. Do you see it the same way?
Well, I guess one would have to define money throws. You know, again, now you get into, you know, that evaluation. I mean, I think ultimately what has to happen is Purdy has to play at his higher level, where he's playing with great timing, great rhythm, great anticipation, seeing things clearly, delivering the football. They're an offense in which Purdy is asked to make a lot of difficult throws between the numbers, between the hashes. These are hard throws in the NFL because there's a lot of bodies there. So there's going to be some difficult throws he's going to have to make. If you want to call them money throws, you can, whatever term you want to use. But, you know, I some people do. I don't necessarily think in terms of, you know, the quarterback's going to have to make, you know, 3 great plays or they can't win. I don't necessarily think about the game that way, which doesn't make me right or anybody else wrong. But I think if you see Purdy early on making the kinds of throws that we've seen him make through much of his short career, where he hits that back foot, ball comes out, hits guys in stride. Then you can have a sense that, hey, he's in a good rhythm, he's seeing it, he's feeling comfortable, and then, you'd expect then he'd play well. If early in the game you see him drop back, hit that back foot, hold on to the ball for whatever reason, just not feel like there's a rhythm there, then you're wondering, okay, how's this going to play out?
All right, Kansas City's defense versus San Francisco's offense. From an X's and O's perspective, what are some of the things that intrigue you, some of the things you want to see answered come Sunday?
Well, I think, when you talk about defense, you always have to talk about defense in terms of situational football, because teams play different defenses, let's say on 1st and 10 versus 3rd and 9. So, I'm really curious to see how the Chiefs line up on 1st and 10. They'll probably be in their base 4-3 with 3 linebackers, 4 defensive backs, because the 49ers play a lot with Juszczyk on the field, so they're a base personnel offense. I think where the Steve Spagnuolo is so good, and where these are the challenges for any offense, not just the Niners, but obviously that's who they're playing, is what he does when you get to 3rd down. He plays basically dime 6 defensive backs. There's a lot of pressure concepts. He uses his DBs, particularly his corners, as blitzers, perhaps more than any team in the league. And you'll see that, I think, because one of the things you do see from the 49ers is what we call cut splits or reduced splits by the wide receivers. They're closer to the formation, which means the cornerbacks are closer to the formation, and it's a shorter distance to blitz. By the way, I think you're going to see that on 1st down, too, even in their base. But I think you're going to see a lot of pressure by Spags, and he'll, I think, do that early to see how Purdy handles it.
One of the things I always talk about, you always want to create doubt, right? And Spagnuolo's done so many things on defense that, it's almost impossible to cover it all, like you mentioned, and whatever they come up with, it still could create doubt on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, and one of the things about Spags that he's so good at is obviously there's zone blitzes and man blitzes, and by that I mean there's blitzes where you're playing a form of zone coverage behind it, and then there's man blitzes where you're just matching up man to man. He's so good with the zone blitzes because his coverages, while they look like sort of normal coverages, the rules are different. And sometimes that can be hard for a quarterback to process instantaneously. As good as Purdy's been, he's probably going to see some things a little differently than he's used to, and how he reacts could be a really important part of this game.
You've seen so much film on Patrick Mahomes. Where do you think, if any, Achilles heel he has?
I don't think he has a true Achilles heel. I've talked to coaches who've coached against him. Mahomes is a little different. He's one of those quarterbacks, he will leave the pocket when he doesn't have to, but then he'll make plays. Sometimes he doesn't go through progressions and he'll leave the pocket. But he's so smart and he sees things so incredibly well. He might see things better than any other quarterback in the league on the move. He just... he has a great feel for spatial awareness. He sees it. He understands it intuitively. He knows when he can run. He knows when he can stop and throw it. This has been a different Chiefs offense this year.
Totally.
Yeah, they've really focused more on the run game. I think Pacheco's been a huge factor, and he's a very difficult back to play against. They've relied a lot more on their defense, as we just talked about. But, it's still Mahomes. That's the thing. You look at this game, and if you look at this season, and if it wasn't Mahomes, you'd say, well, this is not a great offense right now. But you can't go into this game and feel like, Patrick Mahomes isn't going to be a factor in the game.
It's interesting you talked about Mahomes, and you mentioned the fact that, there are quarterbacks that just run, and then there are quarterbacks that run to throw. Mahomes is one of those guys.
He does both.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys that can run and, still make a throw downfield. And then, how do you defend him? You want to man up? Great. He breaks contain. The next thing you know, he's got a 20-yard gain because everybody's running downfield with the receivers. Oh, you want to spy him? Well, guess what? Your athlete, middle linebacker, whoever you want to spy him with, has to be just as good or better an athlete than Mahomes. You want to play zone? He can pick you apart. It's almost like a pick your poison with Mahomes.
Yeah, and I think one reason you always hear coaches say that they want to keep quarterbacks in the pocket, even Mahomes can beat you from the pocket. That's not the point. Mm-hmm. But the reason you hear coaches say that is because then they can maintain and play within the structure of their defense that they've game planned. Once the quarterback gets out of the pocket and you get beyond 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds, and the play now becomes beyond the X's and O's and off script, that's where the defense, it's really hard for the defense. So that's why you hear coaches say with Mahomes, with Josh Allen, with Lamar Jackson, these guys can throw it from the pocket, but you want to keep them in the pocket because you can still play within the structure of how you've practiced. Once you get outside of the structure of how you've practiced, it's just a hard deal.
Greg, before we let you go,
you're not going to ask me to make a prediction now, are you?
No predictions. But what
good.
I'm asking people is, like, what are some of the things that really intrigue you come Sunday? The matchups that you want to see, those questions you want to see answered.
Well, I'm very curious. I'm in the weeds, guy, as you know, with the way I do my work. I'm very curious to see what fronts Steve Spagnuolo uses on first down, because it wouldn't surprise me, depending on the formation that the Niners are in, if we see some 6-1 fronts, where he takes his 2 outside backers and puts them on the ball on the edge and show a 6-1 front, just to defend the run. So I'm really curious to see how he chooses to defend the run on 1st and 10, because I think McCaffrey does have to be a meaningful factor in this game in terms of volume and production, of course. I'm really curious to see how Steve Wilks, the D coordinator for the 49ers, decides to match up here, because they have not been a high percentage man-to-man team. I don't think they'll change their stripes dramatically, but I'm really curious to see how he goes about matching up to the Chiefs, both the run game and the pass game. Pacheco's going to be an interesting player in this game. The 49ers have had a few issues in the run game, particularly their interior of their D-line. So, those are things that I think early on we need to get a feel for.
Greg, great stuff. We appreciate you stopping by. Of course, NFL Films. And if people want to follow you, get more information from Greg Cossell, how do they go about it?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Greg Cossell. I usually don't tweet. I tweet stuff I do, and we always tweet the matchup show segments, which we've started to tweet this week. The show doesn't air till this weekend, but normally I am on Twitter at Greg Cossell.
Thank you so much for stopping by and breaking it down like only you can.
Appreciate it. Thanks.